They say some doors should never be opened. In the winter of 1879, in a quiet brownstone on Philadelphia's Locust Street, there was such a door. Behind it lay stairs descending into darkness, stairs that the servants whispered about, stairs that the doctor's wife refused to acknowledge, stairs that led to a basement where lantern light burned at all hours of the night. What Dr. Edmund Hartwell kept down there would remain hidden for nearly a decade, until one desperate soul broke every rule of propriety and descended those stairs uninvited. What she found would shatter her understanding of medicine, morality, and the very nature of human compassion. This is not a story about monsters. This is a story about the terrible choices we make when saving one life means condemning another. The locked door, the brass bell above Dr. Edmund Hartwell's door, chimed with a brightness that seemed obscene given the circumstances. Sarah Mitchell stood on the threshold, her breath forming small clouds in the February air, her sister's limp body cradled in her arms. Catherine was 17 years old and dying, her skin the color of candle wax, her breathing shallow and rattling. The fever had come 3 days ago, sudden and merciless, and every doctor in Philadelphia had turned them away. Typhoid, they'd said, barely glancing at Catherine before stepping back. Take her to the pest house. Nothing to be done. But the pest house was where people went to die, warehoused with the desperate and the destitute, lying in rows like cordwood until the fever or the dysentery or simple despair carried them off. Sarah had heard the stories. She had walked past that grim building on Reed Street, had smelled the carbolic acid and human waste, had seen the dead cart making its rounds each morning. She would not take her sister there. She could not. Dr. Hartwell's brownstone was the last address on her crumpled list, the last hope in a city that had hardened its heart against contagion. The house stood 3 stories tall, its dark brick facade somehow separate from the neighboring buildings, as though the structure itself had chosen isolation. Sarah had heard whispers about Dr. Hartwell, that he was brilliant and strange, that he'd studied in Vienna and Paris, that he kept unusual hours and even more unusual company. Some said he was a genius. Others said he'd been asked to leave 2 hospitals for reasons no one would quite articulate. Sarah didn't care about gossip. She cared about the weight in her arms, growing lighter by the hour. The door opened. Dr. Edmund Hartwell was not what she expected. He was younger than his reputation suggested, perhaps 40, with dark hair touched with premature silver at the temples. His eyes were gray and careful, assessing Catherine with a physician's detachment, before softening with something that might have been pity. "Typhoid," he said quietly. "It wasn't a question." "Please," Sarah whispered. Her voice cracked on that single word, and she hated herself for it. She had promised herself she would be strong, would be composed, would present her case with dignity. Instead, she was begging on a stranger's doorstep, her dress stained with her sister's sweat, her face streaked with tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. "Please, sir, everyone else has refused us. I have money. Not much, but I'll work, I'll do anything." "How long has she been symptomatic?" 3 days. The fever started suddenly. She was fine at breakfast, and by nightfall she couldn't stand. The spots appeared yesterday. Hartwell's jaw tightened. He glanced past Sarah to the empty street, then stepped aside. "Bring her in. Quickly." The interior of the house was dim and surprisingly cold, as though heat was being rationed or directed elsewhere. The entrance hall was elegant but spare, polished wood floors, a few pieces of simple furniture, medical texts stacked on every available surface. No paintings on the walls, no flowers in vases, none of the decorative touches that marked a home as lived in. It felt more like a waiting room than a residence. "Upstairs," Hartwell said, leading them toward a staircase. "The examination room." Sarah followed, her arms aching from Catherine's weight. Her sister murmured something incoherent, lost in fever dreams. They climbed to the 2nd floor, where Hartwell opened a door to reveal a proper medical office. Examination table, glass-fronted cabinets filled with instruments and bottles, the sharp smell of carbolic acid and something else, something organic and faintly sweet that Sarah couldn't identify. "Put her here." Hartwell gestured to the table, already rolling up his sleeves. His movements were efficient, practiced. He lit 2 additional lamps, flooding the room with light, then began his examination with gentle thoroughness. He checked Catherine's pulse, listened to her breathing, examined the rose-colored spots stippling her abdomen. His expression gave nothing away. Sarah stood frozen by the door, her empty arms hanging useless at her sides. She watched Hartwell work and tried to read hope or despair in his careful movements. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, he straightened. Her fever is very high. The intestinal involvement is advanced. I assume she's had diarrhea. Sarah nodded. Bloody, since yesterday. And you've been caring for her? Yes. Then you've likely been exposed. You should go home, burn your clothes, wash thoroughly with lye soap. No. The word came out harder than Sarah intended. I'm not leaving her. Hartwell studied her with those careful gray eyes. Miss Mitchell, Sarah Mitchell. And this is Catherine, my sister. Our parents are dead. I'm all she has. Something shifted in Hartwell's expression, though Sarah couldn't name it. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. He turned back to Catherine, adjusting the blanket Sarah had wrapped around her. The usual course of typhoid is 3 to 4 weeks, Miss Mitchell. The fever peaks in the 2nd week. Your sister is already severely ill at day 3. That's not a good prognostic sign, but you can help her. Again, not a question. Sarah was done with questions. She had walked 7 miles through the snow carrying her sister, had been turned away from 6 houses, had watched Philadelphia close its doors against them one by one. She had nothing left but demand. Hartwell's silence stretched uncomf. Audibly. He moved to a cabinet, withdrew a brown glass bottle, poured a measured dose into a spoon. This will help with the fever, and I can give her fluids, try to maintain her strength, but Miss Mitchell, I need you to understand, typhoid has no cure. I can treat symptoms, I can try to support her body while it fights the infection, but the mortality rate is somewhere between 10 and 30%, and your sister is very sick. I don't care about statistics. Sarah's voice was steady now, anchored by desperation. Other doctors quoted statistics at me. They gave me numbers and sent me away. You're different. I can see it. You actually looked at her. You let us in. I let you in because leaving a sick girl on my doorstep would have been unconscionable, not because I have some miraculous treatment. Then why do they talk about you the way they do? Hartwell's hand stilled on the medicine bottle. I beg your pardon. At the market, at church, in the boarding house where we rent a room, people talk, Dr. Hartwell. They say you've studied things other doctors won't touch. They say you've saved patients everyone else had given up on. They say... Sarah hesitated, unsure whether to continue, but desperation pushed the words out anyway. They say you work miracles in your basement. The room seemed to grow colder. Hartwell set down the medicine bottle with deliberate care. They say that, do they? Is it true? Miracles are the province of God, Miss Mitchell. I am merely a physician with an interest in advancing medical knowledge. He lifted Catherine's head gently, coaxed the medicine between her lips. A physician who is currently offering your sister the best seat, or simply the strange sensation of being in an unfamiliar place. The house was silent. Too silent. She rose and moved into the hallway, her stockinged feet soundless on the floorboards. Pale moonlight filtered through the windows, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. She intended to check on Catherine, to reassure herself that her sister still breathed. But as she approached the examination room, she heard Hartwell's voice. He was talking to someone, his words too low to make out, his tone urgent. Sarah crept closer. The door was ajar. Deteriorating faster than I anticipated, Hartwell was saying. If I don't intervene soon, she'll be gone by morning. A pause. Sarah realized he must be speaking to someone else, another person in the room. But she hadn't heard anyone arrive, hadn't heard footsteps on the stairs. I know the risks, Hartwell continued. I know what I'm asking, but damn it, Marcus, she's 17 years old. I can't just let her die when I have... He cut himself off. Another pause. Then, fine. Yes, I'll bring her down. Prepare the table. Sarah's heart began to race. Bring her down? Down where? And who was Marcus? She heard movement in the examination room and pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. Through the crack in the door, she saw Hartwell lift Catherine in his arms with surprising gentleness. Catherine didn't stir, unconscious or too weak to react. Hartwell carried her out of the room and turned not toward the main staircase, but toward the back of the house. Sarah waited until he turned the corner, then followed, keeping to the shadows. She found herself in a narrow rear hallway she hadn't seen before. E-end was a door, heavy wood, reinforced with iron bands. It stood slightly ajar, and from beyond it came a faint light and the sound of footsteps descending stairs. The basement? Sarah's hands trembled as she approached the door. Every instinct screamed at her to burst through, to demand explanations, to grab her sister and run. But another part of her, the part that had dragged Catherine across Philadelphia in the snow, that had refused to accept defeat, told her to wait, to watch, to understand what was happening before she acted. She eased the door open wider. Stone steps descended into darkness, with lamplight flickering somewhere below. She could hear voices now. Hartwell's, and another deeper voice she didn't recognize. Sarah gathered her skirts and began to descend. The stairs were steep and cold, the stone walls damp with condensation. As she moved lower, the air grew warmer and stranger. That sweet organic smell she'd noticed earlier became stronger, mixed with other scents, carbolic acid, kerosene, and something metallic she realized with a chill was blood. The staircase opened into a basement that bore no resemblance to a normal cellar. It had been transformed into a fully equipped surgical theater. Gas lamps hung from the ceiling, their light harsh and clinical. A large table dominated the center of the room, its surface scrubbed clean but stained with use. Glass cabinets lined the walls, filled with instruments Sarah recognized: scalpels, forceps, bone saws, and others she didn't. Strange devices of brass and steel that looked more like mechanical experiments than medical tools. But it was what lay beyond the surgical theater that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. At the far end of the basement, separated by a wall of bars like a prison cell, was a ward. 6 beds lined the walls, and in those beds lay people. Living people. They were unconscious or sleeping, their chests rising and falling with steady breaths, their faces peaceful. They were dressed in clean white gowns, tucked beneath blankets, tended with obvious care, and they were all supposed to be dead. Sarah recognized the first one immediately, Martha Brennan, the baker's daughter, who'd supposedly died of consumption 3 months ago. Sarah had attended her funeral, had watched her coffin lowered into the ground, but here she lay, breathing quietly, her cheeks flushed with health rather than fever. In the next bed was a man Sarah didn't know, then a young boy who couldn't have been more than 10, then. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Mrs. Adelaide Winters, the widow who died in a house fire last summer. Half her face was badly scarred, but she was undeniably alive. "Impossible," Sarah whispered. "I'm afraid not." She spun around to find Dr. Hartwell standing at the base of the stairs, blocking her exit. His expression was grave but unsurprised, as though he'd been expecting her. Behind him stood another man, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark skin and intelligent eyes that assessed Sarah with the same careful attention Hartwell gave his patients. "Miss Mitchell," Hartwell said quietly, "I'm very sorry you saw this. Catherine, where is she?" Sarah's eyes darted around the room, found her sister lying on the surgical table, still unconscious. "She's safe. I was about to begin her treatment when Marcus alerted me to your presence on the stairs." He gestured. "Botanical extracts, mineral compounds, and one ingredient we won't disclose. The formula took 2 years to perfect, another year to test, and for the past year, we've been using it." "Using it on people who are dying," Hartwell clarified. "People who have no other hope. We induce the state. We perform whatever interventions are necessary. Surgery, drainage, intensive medication, and we maintain them in suspension while their bodies heal. It takes weeks, sometimes months. Martha has been here for 3 months. Her lungs have regenerated tissue that was destroyed by consumption. It should be impossible, but somehow in this state the body can repair damage that would normally be permanent." Sarah's mind reeled. But why hide it? Why fake their deaths? If you can truly cure these diseases, you should be celebrated, not skulking in a basement with kidnapped patients. Hartwell's expression darkened. "Should I? Tell me, Miss Mitchell, what do you think would happen if I announced this discovery? If I published papers explaining that I can induce a death-like state and bring people back? Do you think the medical establishment would celebrate? Or do you think they'd brand me a charlatan, or worse, a resurrectionist, a body snatcher, a man who plays God?" He closed the journal with a snap. "I've seen what happens to physicians who deviate from accepted practice. I've watched brilliant men be ruined, their discoveries suppressed or stolen, their reputations destroyed. The medical establishment doesn't want innovation, Miss Mitchell. It wants conformity. It wants treatments that can be explained, controlled, monetized. What I do here can't be controlled. It can't be taught in medical schools or sold by pharmacists. It can only be done here, by me, in secret. So you steal patients? Sarah's voice shook with anger. You let their families mourn them, bury empty coffins, wear black for months. I save their lives. Hartwell's composure cracked for the first time. Do you think I enjoy this? Do you think I want to hide in my basement like some gothic villain? I'm a physician, Miss Mitchell. I took an oath to do no harm, to preserve life. These people were dying, and no one else would help them. Their families had given up. Their doctors had abandoned them. I offered them a choice. What choice? They're unconscious. Not when I make the offer. Freeman stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. Dr. Hartwell goes to them before they slip beyond communication. He explains what he can do. He tells them the cost, that they'll have to disappear, that their families will believe they're dead, that they can never go back to their old lives, and he asks them to choose. Sarah looked again at the sleeping patients, and they all said yes? Not all, Hartwell admitted. Some refused. Some chose to die with their names intact rather than live in hiding. I respected their decisions, but these 6, they chose life. They chose hope. And when they wake, we'll help them start over. New names, new towns, new identities. They'll never see their families again, but they'll see another sunrise. They'll have a chance that death would have stolen from them. He turned back to the surgical table, where Catherine lay pale and still. Now I'm offering that same choice to your sister, except I'm offering it to you, because Catherine is beyond hearing me. Her FEV-R is too high, her consciousness too fragile. So I'm asking you, Sarah Mitchell, do you want me to save your sister's life? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah looked at Catherine, at the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the sweat beading on her forehead, the dangerous flush of fever on her cheeks. She thought about Catherine at 17, with so much life ahead of her. Catherine, who loved books and wanted to be a teacher, who sang when she thought no one was listening, who braided wildflowers into crowns each spring. Then she thought about what Hartwell was really asking. Not just do you want her to live, but are you willing to lose her to save her? Because if Catherine woke in this basement weeks or months from now, Sarah would have to bury an empty coffin. She'd have to mourn her sister publicly while secretly knowing she was alive somewhere, with a new name and a new life that didn't include the only family she had left. I need to understand, Sarah said slowly. If I say yes, if you do this, what happens to her? To us. Hartwell pulled up a stool and sat, his movements heavy with fatigue. Sarah realized he must be exhausted. It was past 3 in the morning, and he'd been working since she'd arrived on his doorstep. If you say yes, I'll induce the suspended state tonight. Catherine will appear to die within the hour. I'll provide you with documentation, a death certificate, my professional assessment. You'll return to your boarding house with the terrible news. You'll arrange a funeral. I'll provide a coffin, filled with stones, Sarah said bitterly. Filled with stones, he confirmed, and you'll bury your sister with whatever ceremony you can afford. You'll wear black, you'll mourn. And in 6 to 8 weeks, when Catherine's body has healed, I'll reverse the suspension. She'll wake up confused, weakened, but alive. And then Dr. Freeman and I will help her relocate. We have connections, people who can provide documentation, job placement, housing. Catherine will become someone else. She'll move to another city, perhaps another state. She'll start over, without me, without you, Hartwell agreed quietly. I'm sorry, Miss Mitchell, but it's the only way. If Catherine returned to your boarding house, if she suddenly appeared alive and well, there would be questions, investigations, suspicions. Eventually, someone would trace her back to this house, to this basement, and everything I've built would collapse. The other patients would be at risk. Future patients would be denied this chance. I can't allow that. Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. So I save her by losing her? Yes, she looked at Freeman. And you agree with this? With tearing families apart? Freeman's expression was sorrowful but resolute. I do. Because the alternative is death, Miss Mitchell. Real death, permanent death. Death that doesn't care about family bonds or love or any of the things that make life worth living. At least this way, Catherine lives. At least somewhere in the world, she'll be breathing, thinking, hoping. That's not nothing. It's not everything either. No, Freeman agreed. It's not. Sarah closed her eyes. She thought about her parents, dead these 3 years from the same typhoid that now ravaged Catherine. She thought about the boarding house room they shared, tiny and cold but home because they were together. She thought about Catherine's laugh, her terrible puns, the way she'd hold Sarah's hand during thunderstorms even though she was nearly grown. She thought about burying an empty coffin. Can I? Her voice broke. She tried again. Can I at least know where she goes? Can I have letters or... No. Hartwell's voice was gentle but immovable. I'm sorry. Any contact creates risk. You'll have to let her go completely. That's monstrous. Yes, Hartwell said simply. It is. This whole situation is monstrous, Miss Mitchell. Death is monstrous. Disease is monstrous. I didn't create these circumstances. I'm just trying to salvage what I can from them. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at her sister. Catherine's breathing had become more labored while they talked, her chest hitching with effort. Time was running out. The choice that had seemed impossible was becoming inevitable. If I say no, Sarah whispered, she dies tonight. Almost certainly. The fever will peak, her organs will fail, and by dawn she'll be gone. Hartwell stood, moved to Catherine's side. But she'll die as herself, as Catherine Mitchell. You'll bury her with her own name. You'll be able to visit her grave, bring flowers, remember her. There's value in that, Miss Mitchell. I won't pretend otherwise. But she'll be dead. But she'll be dead, he confirmed. Sarah walked to the table and took Catherine's hand. It was burning hot, the skin dry and papery. She felt the flutter of her sister's pulse, rapid and irregular. Dying. Hartwell was right. Catherine was dying, and no amount of grief or rage or desperate bargaining would change that. Unless Sarah made an impossible choice. She thought about what Catherine would want. Her sister, who was brave and curious, who'd once climbed a tree to save a kitten despite being terrified of heights, who'd shared her meager meals with street children even when they were hungry themselves. Would Catherine choose death with dignity or life in hiding? Sarah already knew the answer. Catherine would choose life. She'd choose the chance to see another spring, read another book, fall in love, make a difference in the world, even if that world never knew her real name. Do it, Sarah said. The words felt like they were being torn from somewhere deep inside her. Save her. Please. Hartwell nodded slowly. You understand what you're agreeing to. You understand that once this is done, you can never take it back. I understand. And you understand that you'll have to sell the lie perfectly. Mourn convincingly. Never slip. Never give anyone reason to doubt that Catherine Mitchell died of typhoid fever on this February night. I understand. Sarah squeezed Catherine's hand one more time, then forced herself to let go. I understand all of it. Just save her, please. Hartwell looked at Freeman, who nodded and began preparing instruments on a side table. Miss Mitchell, I need you to go upstairs. What happens next? It will look like death. I don't want that to be your last memory of your sister. No. Sarah's voice was firm. I'm staying. If these are my last moments with her, I'm not spending them in a sitting room. I'll stay until it's done. Hartwell studied her face, then nodded. Very well, but please stand back. Don't interfere, no matter what you see. Sarah retreated to the wall, wrapping her arms around herself. She watched as Freeman brought the clear vial to Hartwell, who measured out a precise dose into a syringe. The liquid caught the lamplight, glowing faintly. This will be quick, Hartwell said, more to himself than to Sarah. The suspension takes hold within minutes. Her breathing will slow, her pulse will become imperceptible. Her body temperature will drop dramatically. To any observer, she'll appear dead. He slid the needle into Catherine's arm with practiced gentleness. Pressed the plunger. The clear liquid disappeared into her bloodstream. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Catherine took a deep, shuddering breath. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Sarah?" she whispered. "I'm here." Sarah started forward, but Freeman caught her arm, held her back. "It's all right, Catherine," Hartwell said softly. "You're safe. Just relax. Let the medicine work." Catherine's eyes found Sarah across the room. For just a moment they cleared, filled with recognition and something else. Understanding, perhaps, or trust. Then they fluttered closed again. Her breathing slowed more. The harsh rattle in her chest eased, became quiet, became barely perceptible. The fever flush faded from her cheeks, replaced by a pallor that looked like marble. Her pulse, which Sarah had felt racing just moments ago, became a faint flutter, then seemed to stop entirely. Hartwell checked her eyes with a small light, pressed his fingers to her throat, listened to her chest with his stethoscope. When he straightened, his expression was professionally neutral. "It's done. She's in suspension." Sarah stared at her sister's body, because that's what T looked like now. A body, an empty shell. Catherine looked dead. If Sarah hadn't witnessed the process, hadn't heard Hartwell's explanations, she would have sworn her sister had just died in front of her. "She's really alive?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "She's alive," Freeman confirmed. "Her heart is beating perhaps once every 2 minutes. She's taking perhaps 1 breath every 5 minutes. But yes, she's alive." Sarah felt her legs give way. She sank to the floor, her back against the cold stone wall, and finally let herself cry. Not the desperate tears of fear she'd shed earlier, but deep, wrenching sobs of grief and relief and horror, all tangled together. She'd saved Catherine's life by agreeing to her death. She'd chosen hope wrapped in loss. Hartwell gave her time, then knelt beside her. "Miss Mitchell, I know this is unbearable, but you need to leave soon. It will be dawn in a few hours, and you need to be seen returning to your boarding house with the news. The performance begins now." Sarah wiped her face with shaking hands. "What do I say? Tell them you brought Catherine here, that I examined her, that I did everything I could, but the fever was too advanced. Tell them she died peacefully just after 3 o'clock. I'll provide documentation that will satisfy any authorities, and I'll make arrangements for a coffin to be delivered tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Sarah repeated numbly. She'd bury her sister tomorrow. Bury stones and lies while Catherine lay breathing in this basement, suspended between life and death. "Can I?" She looked at Catherine's still form on the table. "Can I say goodbye?" Hartwell nodded and stepped back. Sarah forced herself to stand, to walk to the table, to look down at her sister one last time. Catherine looked peaceful now, all the pain of the fever erased from her face. She looked like she was sleeping. She looked dead. Sarah bent and pressed a kiss to Catherine's cold forehead. "I love you," she whispered. "I hope wherever you go, whatever name you take, you'll be happy. I hope you'll find people to love, work that matters, a life worth this sacrifice. And I hope—" her voice broke. "I hope sometimes you'll think of me." She straightened, forced herself to step back, to turn away. Freeman was waiting by the stairs with her cloak. He draped it around her shoulders with unexpected kindness. "Miss Mitchell," he said quietly, "what Dr. Hartwell is doing here, it may seem cruel, but it comes from a desire to save lives when no one else will try. Your sister will have a chance. That's more than most people get." "I know," Sarah said. "I just wish the price wasn't so high." "All the prices worth paying are high," Freeman said. "That's how you know they matter." Hartwell walked her up the stairs and through the silent house to the front door. Dawn was beginning to break, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale gold. The city was waking. Sarah could hear the distant clatter of a milk cart, the bark of a dog, the ordinary sounds of life continuing despite everything. "In 8 weeks," Hartwell said, "I'll send word through an intermediary. Just a message saying that Catherine's treatment was successful. You'll never hear from her directly, but you'll know she's alive and well. It's the most I can offer." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. She pulled her cloak tighter and stepped out into the cold morning air. The door closed behind her with a quiet click, as final as a coffin lid. She walked through the waking streets of Philadelphia, her empty arms hanging at her sides, and began to plan her sister's funeral. The weeks that followed were a special kind of torment. Sarah played her role perfectly because she had no choice. She wept as she told her landlady about Catherine's death. She accepted condolences from neighbors with appropriate gratitude. She arranged a simple funeral, all she could afford, and stood by a closed coffin while a minister who'd never met Catherine spoke about God's mysterious ways. She watched them lower the coffin into frozen ground and wondered if anyone could hear the faint rattle of stones inside. At night, alone in the room she'd shared with Catherine, Sarah would lie awake and imagine her sister in that basement, suspended in impossible sleep, while her body healed itself from the inside out. She imagined Dr. Hartwell checking Catherine's pulse, adjusting medications, making meticulous notes in his leather journal. She imagined the moment Catherine would wake, confused, frightened, alone in a strange place with a stranger's face looking down at her. She imagined all the things she'd never be able to tell Catherine, that she'd kept her books, that she'd framed the last drawing Catherine had made, a terrible sketch of a cat that looked more like a potato, that she thought of her every morning and dreamed of her every night. 6 weeks after the funeral, Sarah returned to Dr. Hartwell's house. She didn't ring the bell. She simply stood across the street in the cold, watching the windows, hoping for, she didn't know what. A shadow, perhaps. Some sign that Catherine was stirring, coming back to life. The door opened. Dr. Freeman stepped out, saw her standing there, and crossed the street to meet her. "She's awake," he said quietly, "as of 2 days ago. She's weak, but recovering well." Sarah's knees buckled. Freeman caught her arm, steadied her. "She's asking for you," he continued. "She doesn't understand why you're not here. Dr. Hartwell is trying to explain, but she's 17 and frightened, and she wants her sister," Sarah finished. "I know. Tell her." She stopped. What could she possibly say? What message could convey both love and goodbye? "Tell her I'm proud of her. Tell her to be brave. Tell her—" Sarah's voice broke. "Tell her she gave me the greatest gift anyone can give. She let me save her life, even if it cost me everything." Freeman nodded slowly. "I'll tell her. And Miss Mitchell? For what it's worth, Dr. Hartwell is arranging for Catherine to go to a teaching position in Ohio. Small town, good school, people who won't ask too many questions about her past. She'll be Catherine Clark, close enough to her real name that she won't forget who she was, different enough that no one will connect her to a dead girl from Philadelphia." "A teacher," Sarah whispered. Catherine had always wanted to be a teacher. Even in hiding, even with a stolen name, she'd get to live her dream. That was something. That was everything. "We'll take care of her," Freeman promised, "as much as we can. And in time, maybe she'll understand why you made the choice you did." Sarah nodded and turned away before she could break down completely. She walked back through the Philadelphia streets one more time, and this time she didn't look back at Dr. Hartwell's house. This time, she let Catherine go. 8 weeks and 3 days after Catherine's supposed death, Sarah received a letter. There was no return address, no signature, just a single line written in careful script. "The patient has made a full recovery and begun her new life." Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box where she kept Catherine's things. Her books, her hair ribbons, the potato cat drawing. Then she dressed in black, as widows and orphans did, and went to work at the textile mill where she'd found employment. Life continued. It always did. Sarah learned to smile at the right times, to accept sympathy without breaking, to carry her grief like a coat she could never quite remove. She learned to live with the peculiar pain of mourning someone who wasn't dead, of being both bereaved and blessed. Years passed. Sarah married eventually, a kind man who worked at the mill, who never quite understood the sadness that sometimes shadowed her eyes, but loved her anyway. They had children, and Sarah told them stories about their Aunt Catherine, who died so young, before they were born. She made Catherine a ghost, a memory, a cautionary tale about the fragility of life. But sometimes, late at night when her husband was asleep and the house was quiet, Sarah would take out that single-line letter and read it again. "The patient has made a full recovery and begun her new life." 5 words that meant everything and nothing. Proof of life, proof of loss. Sarah never learned where Catherine went, never heard her sister's new name, never knew if Catherine Clark, the teacher, married, had children of her own, lived a life of quiet contentment or raging ambition or gentle ordinariness. She never knew if Catherine thought of her, if she mourned the sister she'd been forced to leave behind, if she understood the choice Sarah had made in that cold basement on a February night. She never knew. And somehow, she learned to live with that. In 1889, 10 years after that February night, Sarah read in the newspaper about a mysterious fire that had destroyed a brownstone on Locust Street. The owner, Dr. Edmund Hartwell, had perished in the flames. There were no other casualties reported, though neighbors swore they'd heard voices coming from the basement in the days before the fire. The article mentioned that Dr. Hartwell had been a reclusive figure, rumored to conduct experimental medical research, though no evidence of such work was found in the ruins. His colleague, Dr. Marcus Freeman, could not be reached for comment. Sarah folded the newspaper carefully and added it to the box with Catherine's things. She wondered if the fire had been accident or intention, if those 6 patients in suspended animation had been evacuated, or had simply ceased to exist when their keeper died. She wondered if Freeman had carried them out one by one, given them new names, scattered them across the country like seeds. She wondered if somewhere, a teacher named Catherine Clark had read the same newspaper article and understood that the door to her past had finally, irrevocably closed. Sarah never learned the truth, but on the 10th anniversary of Catherine's supposed death, she received another letter. Same careful script, same lack of signature. She is well. She is happy. She thinks of you. Sarah held that letter for a long time, and then she cried, not from grief but from gratitude. Her sister was alive somewhere in the world, alive and well and happy, living under a stolen name but living nonetheless. The choice Sarah had made in Dr. Hartwell's basement had given Catherine something precious: time. Years she wouldn't have had, experiences she wouldn't have known, love she wouldn't have found. It had cost Sarah everything to give Catherine that gift. But as she folded the letter and added it to her box of treasures, she knew she'd make the same choice again, and again. As many times as necessary. Because that's what love is, Sarah thought. Not holding on, but letting go when letting go means life. Not claiming ownership, but granting freedom. Not choosing what makes you happy, but choosing what keeps the people you love breathing. In the end, Dr. Hartwell's basement had been exactly what the servants whispered it was, a place where the rules of life and death bent into impossible shapes, a place where miracles happened, purchased at terrible cost, a place where people disappeared and yet somehow, in ways that defied understanding, lived on. Sarah never spoke of it. She kept the secret until her dying day, locked it away with Catherine's hair ribbons and the potato cat drawing and those 2 precious letters. And when she died, years later, surrounded by children and grandchildren who knew nothing of the aunt they'd never met, Sarah's last thought was a simple one. I saved her. I lost her, but I saved her. And that was enough. It had to be enough. Because love, real, deep, impossible love, isn't measured in presence. It's measured in sacrifice. And Sarah had sacrificed everything. But somewhere in Ohio, or perhaps somewhere else entirely, a teacher named Catherine Clark stood in front of a classroom and taught children to read. She wore a different name but still made terrible puns. She still loved books. She still sang when she thought no one was listening. And sometimes, on quiet February nights, she thought about a sister she'd lost to gain her life and whispered thank you to the darkness. That was enough too. That had to be enough. Because in the end, that's all any of us can hope for. That the people we love live on, even if we can't walk beside them. That our sacrifices mean something. That somewhere in the world, someone we saved is breathing, hoping, continuing. That's the real miracle of Dr. Hartwell's basement. Not the impossible medicine, or the suspended animation, or the resurrections that weren't quite resurrections. The real miracle was this. That love could be so powerful, it chose loss. That hope could be so fierce, it accepted grief. That one sister could make an impossible choice on a February night, and decades later, that choice would still echo through the world in the form of a living, breathing woman who got to see one more sunrise, and another, forever.